that I am stems from when my mother put me on a train, part of the Kindertransport in Vienna, and sent me out of Nazi Europe to unknown strangers in England. At 5 years old, clutching the hand of my 9-year-old sister, I had very little idea of what was going on. Where is England? What is England? Why am I being sent there? I'm only here today because so long ago I was helped by generous strangers. It was a 2.5-day journey from Vienna to Hoek van Holland and then across the channel to Harwich. Each train had 1,000 children with just 2 adults, children aged 5 to 16. There were also some girls aged 16 plus who were looking after babies. Of course, I didn't know at the time that they traveled under concession, dependent on their return to Germany, to what they must have known was almost certain death. And I like always to honor the sheer heroism of those young people. I was doubly lucky to be reunited with my birth parents after the war, but I never bonded with them again. But I've done more in the 75 years since that miserable day when my mother put me on a train in 1939 than I could ever have believed possible. I love England, my adopted country, with a passion that perhaps only someone who has lost their human rights can feel. So where did my success come from? To circumvent the gender issues of the day, this was the late 1950s, I set up my own high-tech software company, one of the first such startups in Britain. It was a company of women, a company for women, an early social business. People laughed at the very idea because software at that time was given away free with the hardware, and nobody would buy software, certainly not from a woman. They laughed at my crusade for women. Although women were then coming out of the universities with different degrees, decent degrees, I'm so sorry. There was a glass ceiling to our progress. But I wanted opportunities for women. I wanted those opportunities. And I recruited professionally qualified women who had left the computer industry on marriage or when their first child was expected and structured them into a home-working organization. We pioneered the concept of women going back into the workforce after a career break. We pioneered a whole lot of new work methods, all kinds of flexible working, job shares, then profit shares, then co-ownership, when I managed to get a quarter of the company into the hands of the staff at no cost to anyone but me. I was a pathfinder in the professionalism of women, especially in the high-tech areas. And for years, I was the first woman this, the only woman that. My generation of women fought the battles for the right to work and the right to serve. No one expected much from women in work because the expectations then were about home and family responsibilities. I couldn't accept that and so challenged the conventions of the time, even to the extent of changing my name from Stephanie to Steve in my business development letters. So when I signed that double feminine Stephanie Shirley, there was little response. When I signed as Steve Shirley, I began to get a reply, and I was through that door before they realized that he was a she. It couldn't have started smaller, on the dining room table with literally about £100 in today's money, but financed by my own labour and by a loan on the marital home. My interests were scientific. The market was commercial. things like payroll, which I found excruciatingly boring. But I found a compromise in operations research, which had the technical and intellectual interest for me, and at the same time had commercial value. Things like scheduling freight trains, timetabling buses, siting oil depots. Gradually, the work came in. We disguised the domestic and part-time nature of the workforce by offering fixed prices. Who would have guessed that the programming of the black box flight recorder for supersonic Concorde was done by a bunch of women working in our homes? All that we used was the simple telephone and the magic power of trusting the staff. An early project for the Ebook management consultancy was to develop software protocols, software standards. And software was then and is today still a hard to pin down activity. So that was enormously valuable to be paid to develop that. We used the standards ourselves, were paid to update them over the years, and eventually they were adopted by NATO. Our programmers, how did we work 50 years ago? We had paper and pencil. We developed flow charts defining the tasks to be done. And programmers then wrote code, sometimes in machine code, sometimes in binary, which was sent by mail to a data center for punching onto paper tape or punch cards. And it was then repunched in order to verify that punching, all that before it was ever submitted to the mainframe computer. And our schedules were based on 2 such turnarounds a week. That was programming. Later, we feared that high-level languages, things like Fortran and COBOL, would invalidate our business model. But the giant IBM was the first to unbundle software, and having unbundled it from the hardware, that was a tremendous boost for the business. In 1975, 13 years from the company's startup, Britain's equal opportunities legislation came in, which meant it was illegal to have our pro-female policies. So as an example of unexpected and undesigned consequences, we had to let the men in if they were good enough. When I started my woman's company, people said, "How interesting." But because it only works because it's small. And as the company grew, the same people commented, "Yeah, it's sizable now, but of no strategic interest." And later still, when it was a gazillion-pound business and I'd made 70 of my colleagues into multimillionaires, they commented, "Well done, Steve." You can always tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat on top from being patted patronizingly. Sometimes with smaller feet, so as to stand closer to the kitchen sink. Now, my experience may seem to you like ancient history, yet in some cultures today, I find myself again acting as a role model for women. The British ambassador in a Middle East country told me on my last visit there that he would get a call from immigration whenever an unaccompanied female Brit, aged less than 30, arrived at the border. "Your Excellency, sir, we have another prostitute seeking entry." And worldwide, women still have a long way to go. Let me share with you one of the secrets of success. Choose your partner very carefully. The other day when I said, my husband's an angel, a woman complained. You're lucky, she said, mine's still alive. If success were easy, we'd all be millionaires. In my case, it came in the midst of family pressures. Our late son, Giles, was a beautiful baby, contented and happy. And then at 2.5 years old, he changed over a period of days or weeks, I really can't remember anymore, into a wild, unmanageable toddler. He lost the little speech that he had. And suddenly, there was this changeling, like a fairy story, in his place. Not the terrible twos. He was autistic, and he never spoke again. Classically, Giles was the first resident and the first home of the first charity that I set up to support now 70 adults with autism and what the social workers term challenging behavior. And that led to a number of not-for-profit projects, including a special, very special, residential school for pupils aged 5 to 18, with its young adult centre keeping students up to the age of 25. Then there's Autism Cymru in bilingual Wales, which is increasingly more and more difficult for people with communication problems. And Autistica, which funds medical research into autism spectrum disorders. What it is, as distinct from what it looks like. Giving is all that I do now. My husband need never worry if I were to get lost, because several charities would quickly come and find me. I'm a workaholic. I believe in the beauty of work when we do it properly and in humility. Work is not just something I do when I'd rather be doing something else. I only invest really, in things that I know and care about. And there are only two really, IT, my professional discipline, and autism, my late son's disorder. £5 million to the IT livery company in the City of London, £10 million to the Oxford Internet Institute, which researches the social, economic, legal and ethical issues of the internet, not the technology per se, but the main lot, over 50 million, to autism. For an entrepreneur to have an idea for an enterprise, any enterprise, and then make it happen, demands extraordinary energy, self-belief, and perseverance. A readiness to deny facts, the courage to risk family and home, and a 24/7 commitment that borders on the obsessive. We live our lives forward, but my unaccompanied child refugee years taught me that tomorrow's never going to be like today, certainly not like yesterday. And that made me able to cope with change, indeed eventually to welcome change. I like doing new things and making new things happen. They taught me that even in the blackest moments of despair, there is hope if one can find the courage to pursue it. Sometimes the worst is less overwhelmingly awful than we fear. Sometimes the right attitude can create good, even from life's most terrible situations. We waste too much time being afraid when what we should really fear is wasting time. Thank you very much.